podcast. I'm your co-host MD, and with me is Gabe Enslin, co-owner and leader at Adapt by Design. The purpose of this podcast is to discover the stories of small business owners and leaders and the challenge they've faced. What are the creative ways in which they've solved some of these, and what are the epic fails they've had and learned from? Gabe, welcome.
Thanks, mate.
As we near the end of 2022, take me through your highlights for this year through the prism of running Adapt.
Sure. So it's been a big year for us, that's for sure. At the beginning of the year, we reformed a new leadership team of the business, and that team has been together now for just about a year doing the work of leading the business. They've done an extremely great job at that. Through that, we've been able to enable the succession of Bill, who's the founder of that. And that's been a wonderful, good news story. We've seen some amazing stories come out of some of the businesses of our customers through the year, really profound changes and milestones that they've been able to achieve culturally, strategically, etc. And then not that long ago, we were advised that we've been recognised as a Telstra Best of Business state finalist, which is a big deal for our little business as well.
That's fantastic. On the topic of the Telstra Best of Business state finalist, how does it feel being a relatively small business, making it one state finalist, but also looking at the calibre of other businesses that are at the finalist stage? How does that feel?
Look, I've said this to our team already. For me, it already feels like a win. Seeing our name of our little business up against some of the extraordinary businesses that were recognised as state finalists, I think is an amazing achievement. And if that's what we achieve, it's a massive pat on the back for what this business have done already. And we know it's only the beginning. So already something huge to celebrate. Plus, I hope we're able to give them a good run for the Guernsey.
Perfect. So I guess today we're actually going full circle at Adapt. And we're bringing it back to where it all started with Adapt owner, founder, Bill Withers. Gabe, I've actually had the pleasure of seeing you two operating together. And I've seen the respect that exists between the both of you. So why don't you do the honours?
Thanks. So it's my privilege to introduce our guest for episode 1 of this podcast series, Bill Withers, the founder of Adapt by Design. So I've had the distinct privilege to work pretty much shoulder to shoulder with Bill for over a year and a half now, or just about a year and a half, as we enabled the succession of Bill from leading the business into the next phase of his life, and watching what he built in this business and how he operates in his strong and humble leadership has been a massive inspiration for me. And he's got an extraordinary story, and I want to hand over to Bill to give us a bit of his turbo founder story. How did we get to today?
Thanks, Gabe. Turbo is always a challenge for me. Anybody that knows me, it takes about 45 minutes for me to say hello, but I'll do my best here. I want to, because I'm coming to the end of my entrepreneurial journey. I do think it's right to go all the way back to December 1984 when I started. I joined a one-person company called Metec with a guy called Charlie Bass, and it was a mine services company, and my job was to be a software engineer to help build that company to provide bespoke offerings, and I was a Fortran programmer. I eventually became the managing director of that company at about 30, and I became an owner of the company at about 27, I think it was, and then managing director at 30. And then I always had a passion to build software, and I really loved the idea of becoming a software company. So we put Metec on a software company footing, and we started to produce software that went into the product that was called MedSystem Mindsight. And in the discovery of going through all of that, we determined that there was all these observations and measurements that were being collected by mining companies, and they didn't really have a repository that would allow them to store both the original observations but also the metadata. So in 1996, founded a company called Acquire Technology Solutions, and we built an information management system for geoscience data. My passion about building software was morphed rather quickly in that journey, and I became passionate about the intriguing problem of how do you steward a growing small medium enterprise as it grows globally and has to be able to sustain through different booms and busts. And so it was in that journey of trying to answer questions about how do you build a resilient business that I realized that was my passion. And I became very, very interested in trying to help other SME owners because I had so much empathy for anybody that chooses to commit their capital to go and try and solve a problem. And so I've found that to this day, that's my enduring sort of, that's where a lot of my empathy goes because I realize the extraordinary value these people bring to the world. And so, I'm on a podcast like this because any little morsel I can share that is in service of other SME founders, owners, that's it. So we get to Adapt by Design. Adapt by Design was founded in 2014. So each company founded the other company. So it's a continuum, my entrepreneurial journey. And I feel that, the journey, this 9 years, it's so cool and so incredible to get to the point where with Gabe and the other organizational leaders at Adapt, Gillian, Steve, and now Dave, that Gabe's given me the opportunity to actually hang up my entrepreneurial boots, and I am hanging up my entrepreneurial boots. I'm 61, and it requires a lot of energy. The other thing is that I've always been in technology, and I've been using this little story to help people understand that I'm coming to the end, and it's our business needs renewal. It needs renewal because we're about to build something that could be using all forms of new technology. It could be using some machine learning. It could be using all sorts of different technologies. And I'm finding that I am the coyote on the side of the cliff with my fingernails into the side of the cliff as I slide down because I just can't keep up. So for 37 years in technology, I've finally realized that my days are done, and so what we have at Adapt is now we have this great opportunity to integrate young energy, contemporary ideas with a little bit of grey hair and wisdom, and integrates the underscored word there. It's not an or, it's an and. And I think this is another thing that we can share with other SME owners is that to percolate leaders and requires the old guys to get out of the way but not leave the system. And I think that that's hopefully one of the messages I share today.
So, you referenced your entrepreneurial journey, and I know from experience because I work closely with you that a lot of the work that you've done, especially in the last 9 years through Adapt, is to empower leaders in their entrepreneurial ventures and help them build businesses that are resilient. Now, the term entrepreneur is widely used by many people, and I think different people have different perspectives on that, what that means. But I was interested to explore with you what's your definition of an entrepreneur, and also why do you believe that we typically find them in the SME landscape?
Yeah, well, I think this this got to take me about 8 hours. No, I'll give you the turbo. Here's the thing. I think that entrepreneurs, the sort of entrepreneurship. Let's go with this is my definition, and this is the sort of entrepreneurship that I think I've been through, and that is where I see an underserved need that I actually think needs resolving, and I want to solve that particular underserved need. And then what I do is from that I say, okay, I have a vision for what I see the solution is, but not only the solving of the problem. What sort of organization am I going to build that is actually going to be able to deliver that problem? And then I have to make a decision, how much capital am I willing to deploy in service of that vision and that problem? And I think that that's my summation. So it's where vision meets capital. Now, I think there's a really interesting thing in the SME world. The SME world, by definition to me, is where there is a big overlap between ownership and leadership. So the majority of ownership is inside the business in an SME. This makes them wonderful organizations because you can meet the vision custodian and you can talk to the vision custodian, so you get an authentic understanding of the vision.
And I've, sorry to interrupt you there, but I've heard you refer to that as the decision rights are in the room.
Yes, so if, let me just get a little bit techie here, but, in most shareholders' agreements, there's a special resolution and for decision rights. So as long as you have 75% of the ownership, you have all the decision rights of the business. So consequently, that's what we see. All the decision rights are in the room. That means that they're extraordinarily, if the owner leaders choose to harness this advantage. Many don't, and that's what we're trying to help people with. If they can harness the advantage of actually saying, you know what, we're small and agile, in 2022, that is an advantage. So if I go back to when I started my business career, you needed to be big. Even in 2004, I bought a CRM for it was about $200,000, I think, by the time we implemented it and all the rest
Sorry,
of it.
Bill, what, just for those that don't know what a CRM is?
It's a customer relationship management system. So back in those days, we didn't have cloud computing. It was a in-sourced piece of software which required a lot of configuration and customization to get running. So the costs were very high. Now, you think about what in Adapt by Design we use Pipedrive. Pipedrive costs, $15 per person per month or something like that. It's extraordinarily cheap. What's happened is that small's beautiful, and what we want to do is we want to really harness these SMEs because they're the perfect sort of anti-fragile structure to build an economy around, because you can have many, many, many super agile entities instead of too big to fail sort of entities. So I think that's why I feel that there's so many benefits. You get great social benefits because they all are human scale entities too. Whereas if you build these very, very large organizations, they tend to be, I think the statistic I heard is somewhere between 75 to 80% of people are disconnected from their work. So they're not engaged. They're just not engaged. Now, in an SME, what I've seen is because they're human scale and everybody knows everybody's first name, and you can go and talk to the vision custodian as the owner, they tend to be more human scale, real, relationship-based businesses.
I just want to go back there. So you gave us your definition of an entrepreneur, and I want to attempt to summarize it. And so, in your opinion, an entrepreneur is somebody who has a vision and then finds a way to realize that vision, typically by connecting it to capital. Is that?
That's correct. The one thing that I would put in here is that some businesses can bootstrap, which means that they can get to revenue faster and hence don't need a lot of startup capital. Others need a lot of startup capital. Now, depending upon which of these you are, you're going to have a very different entrepreneurial journey because you're going to have to try and find external capital. I think though is I don't know if you're an entrepreneur if you do not put up any capital, if you don't put up any skin in the game, if you don't commit to that vision with your own capital, that is not entrepreneurship to me. That is, you are effectively a person that may have gained some ownership of something, but you didn't actually take the pain of committing your own capital. So if you're only using other people's capital, I think that's a different form of entrepreneurship and it doesn't pass the SME test.
And then does that relate to not taking the brunt of the risk? Because you're risking other people's money, not your own. You're not mortgaging your own house to be able to put money forwards to realise a vision.
That's absolutely correct. I think it's the US Marines that use the term leaders eat last. Well, what I know about this type of entrepreneurship is that the SME owner leader eats last. So what you'll do is you'll do everything you can to sustain your system so you can get after that vision, and you'll pay yourself peanuts. And I've now intersected many, many, many SME owner leaders, and there's so many stories in this area where people just, pay themselves very little so they can get their business up and running. Now, ultimately, you need to build the skills and everything else to make sure you remunerate yourself so you're not, at some point, it's not a real reflection of a business if it can't fund you. But at the beginning, it's essential, I think.
What are the,
sorry, you go, mate. Oh, yeah, I was going to defer to you anyway.
You just mentioned earlier the SME, the entrepreneur, the leader. You've seen a fair few of them now in your time. What are the common threads that make them successful?
I think,
Are there any common attributes, personality-wise, insight, worldview, behaviours?
I think actually it's quite broad. I've got a way in Adapt, we're very, very role centric. We talk about role clarity all the time. And what I've noticed is a lot of SME owners were great technicians, principal technicians, and they solved the underserved need by actually building, a great product by them physically being. And so what they are is they don't realize it, but they're the owner, they're the director, they're the organizational leader, they're the team leader, and they're the technician. What happens is that they're not trained as team leaders, but they get empirically trained to do it. Some do it better than others. I think that what I would say is the successful SME owners have energy, lots of energy, and generally a lot of give a shit. They have this real belief in what they're doing, and they're prepared to put themselves under extraordinarily difficult situations to achieve that vision. And I think very few SME owners I know do it easy. It is a difficult thing to do. It genuinely is, because if there's an underserved need and you're trying to go to market and get it, there's just so much to learn and so many potential challenges. The other thing is that you live and breathe by revenue. At the end of the day, that's the only way that you can build a resilient business, is you have to build revenue and you have to ultimately build profit. And profit, I think, is a dirty word in today's world, but profit is simply the excess amount that you have. And a lot of SMEs, and lots, I would say the majority I've met, reinvest it. They put it back into their business so that their business can sustain. So that even the term profit, people think that they're pulling it out to go and buy Maseratis. So it's not really my experience at all. They want to make sure, and a lot of SME owners that I've come across genuinely, whether it's unconscious or conscious, they genuinely want the people that have helped them be successful. They want their people to be successful. They want their people to achieve their financial needs and to, have a good life, and so that's what I mean about human systems. They're relationship-based organisations. So now I'll say that yes, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? The people that set up SMEs are, the full cross-section of humanity. However, if the SME sustains, it's rare for it to sustain if because you can't keep attracting good people if you burn people, right? So every time you have a low integrity leave, you reduce the resilience of your business, and so it becomes more and more difficult to attract highly capable people. Highly capable people are the way that you achieve. That's the so. I mean, that was very long-winded in the end, but that's my summary.
Well, I mean, it created the perfect segue into my next question. So, the intention of today is to talk to you about vision and capital. And we started off by trying to define what an entrepreneur is somebody who needs to have vision and then potentially take some risk to connect it to a means of capitalizing on that vision. You took us through talking about how a lot of SMEs start where a technician is trying to solve a problem and they end up in a position where they have to lead and they also own the business. So there's a bunch of roles there. But on the topic of vision and capital, that's primarily the role of the owner of the business. And if you're the owner of the business, you generally carry the legal responsibility of the business, which is what we call a director. Now, I know from personal experience and from the work that we do that you're quite passionate about clarity around the accountabilities of owners and directors in an SME. What I want to explore with you is why do you think it's so important to define those and be clear on those, and how do you leverage that then to build a resilient business?
So this is a very, very big question, but basically there's 3 different bins of accountabilities in an SME. There's operational, there's the organizational leadership type accountabilities, which are around strategy and culture and systemization and that sort of thing. And then there's the owner-director, which is about how you document and understand your vision, and then how that vision informs your capital decisions, which can inform remuneration, can inform profit distribution. Now, if you design a business by, let's just say, I'm going to design my business by a guy called Bill Withers, as opposed to saying, what are the roles that Bill Withers performs? What I'll end up doing is just doing a bunch of work where 1 minute I'm knocking off a transaction for the customer, the next minute I'm working out how we're going to put in place a process to maximize recruiting good people, and then the next minute I'm saying, where's that shareholders agreement? I've got to change it. Now, if we don't break these accountabilities up into very, very clear spaces and then create the habits and practices to be able to do that work well and effectively, we are almost guaranteeing burnout for the owner. Difficult and challenging. Going to work each day is difficult because everybody wants a piece of the owner. Because they've got their hooks into every part of their business. So if we can break it away, so we want to talk about capital and vision. As an owner, right, I think that we want to separate out everything to do with strategy and operations and all that stuff, and just talk about what happens for owners. And I think that, shall I go into briefly just what those accountabilities are?
Yeah, totally. And we'll expand on vision a little bit after. But I think going through what you see the accountabilities for the ownership team is very, very important.
Yeah, so let's begin by saying what is an accountability. I like to write accountabilities with a verb. It begins with a verb and then what the accountability is. And you don't make any reference to any specific name or customer or anything like that. It's something that should be timeless. So, for instance, we might have something called the manage and maintain working capital. Managing and maintain working capital. Now, that is typical accountability on an ownership team. So if you think about it, organizational leaders in SMEs are often non-owners. So if you want to build a great organizational leadership team, you don't want to put the constraints of the non-owner can't be making decisions about the working capital if the working capital is actually the owner's capital. So this is where we've got to pull those two things apart. So the typical sort of bunch of accountabilities on an owner director team are that you have to create and maintain the internal and external vision. We'll talk more about that later, of the business, to maintain healthy working capital, to design the succession of ownership, or to design the ownership model or framework, to then put in place all the infrastructure. So it might be maintain shareholders' agreement in service of ownership model. Then you'll have accountabilities around remuneration. Now, let me just make this point. So in some businesses, you might choose to put the remuneration decision-making on the organizational leadership team. However, when you're in knowledge businesses, it's often that that expenditure in a business is usually around 80% of operating expenditure. So it can have a massive impact on capital. So you've just got to be open-eyed and make sure that you are considering, well, if I'm going to give that decision right to the organisational leaders, just understand that it still needs to be in some sort of envelope. You know, it can't be open-ended.
I want to unpack something there a little bit with you. So you gave us some accountabilities that typically sits with the owner-director team, and they are big ones. They are whoppers. There's some serious work there that needs to be done. But typically in SMEs, the owner-director is also an organisational leader, is quite often also an operational leader or a technician. So you've got a heap of roles that you have to deliver. And I know from experience, and I know you know, that quite often the burning need is the first thing that you end up tackling, which is operational issues. So then if you haven't got clarity around your accountabilities as an owner and the need to deliver on those accountabilities, I know that can get kicked down the road. You got any examples of how you've seen that play out maybe in your own journey?
Absolutely. I think I was 2003. I was near death. I was the managing director. I think that's the term we used. I was the main business development guy. I was not doing so much delivery anymore, but I had a lot to do with product and the product design. And so what I found was that I was tired, worn out, and I could see we were about to grow at a very, very fast rate. And so I just had very good fortune one day to get on a plane to the US. Now, that flight from Sydney was a 14-hour flight. And so what I was able to do was be totally non-distracted for 14 hours. And I wrote a tome. I wrote a book about how I'm going to change things. And it was, I don't know why it happened. I don't know how it came to me that the role clarity was the secret sauce. But what it allowed me to do was, we had people just getting paid salaries where we had conflated their ownership, their directorship, their employee role. We just made it up, basically. And it's because we had no clarity of those three different areas. And so once we were able to start pulling the technician role and the team leader role apart, and we were able to, it changed everything. It changed how we remunerate people. It created enormous amount of clarity in the business. So my own experiences back in 2003 were sort of like the genesis of starting to understand. There's one other thing I really want to add here, and this was the other insight I started to work out. When you process transactions as a technician, they tend to have a life period or a time period of you know, maybe a day, hours, days, weeks, and then you go to a team leader, it might be months. But you can't do, an organizational leader is supposed to be doing annual planning and 3 to 5 year goals and that sort of level. And then an owner director is the life of the business. So here's one of the really interesting observations is that if you try and use a technician mindset to solve a life of business problem, you are lost. You will fail. Bad things will happen because you have to park the car to do. So as an owner director, you have very, very big decisions that get made very, very rarely. As a technician, you have thousands of transactions, heaps of transactions that you have to make very frequently. So if you don't adjust your mindset for the different roles, the probability of success is reduced significantly.
So you took us back to 2003 where you got to the pointy end of this challenge of role ambiguity, if I can call it that. Coming to today, 2022, you're doing very high level, very meaningful, very sophisticated work with owner directors teams to help them set up a high performing owner director team and become very clear on the accountabilities that they carry as owners and directors. Have you encountered any particular challenges owner directors face as they go through that work with you, or is there any really great outcomes or revelations on the other side of the work?
Well, I think the first thing is that we're going to use this term practices, right? Now, if you want to be healthy, often you'll have good practices around your health, right? So I want to talk about this concept of practices because what I think every team I've worked with, they're realizing that they need to put in new habits and practices in their business. New habits and practices in their business. So what this means is it's changing of behavior, and it's changing. It's not we're going to be doing the same thing a different way. What we're doing is putting in new practices. So I know that I've sounded like, Bill, what are you harping on for? Well, this is because this is the hardest thing to do, to actually establish. I talk about parking the car. I think the Western world has been very good at saying, okay, do everything at 100 kilometres an hour and, maybe decelerate to 80 kilometres an hour for the majority of things, but never park the car. Well, for owner directors, if they don't create the conditions to park the car, they're not going to be able to do the really good work. And so what I found is that a lot of people, the technician roles and the operation demand is meaning that they're trying to build an ownership model in the cafe or on the kitchen table. And this is a really, really fraught with there's a lot of problems here. You can make company killing decisions, and I've seen them. I've seen, at the beginning of my journey in Adapt, I remember in Pulp Fiction, there was it Mr. Wolf that cleans up the brains? I felt like Mr. Wolf because instead of putting in place new practices to prevent bad outcomes, I had to help some owners clean up a mess. And I made a decision never to do that again. I didn't want to do that.
How's that working out for you?
No, it's not working out for me well. I mean, I still run into it quite a bit. And I feel that nobody's doing anything with any malicious intent at all. In actual fact, it's the opposite. Everybody is genuinely in service of each other, but because it hasn't been thought through and designed, the outcome is really quite sad sometimes, and it requires a business divorce, and I feel, let's just, as long as we all go into these things with our eyes wide open. So putting in the practices where we park the car and do the proper work as owner directors is my big tip for anybody listening to this.
I think what I'm sort of picking up in terms of what you're putting down is you're talking about seeing the forest from the trees, really. It's about looking up, purposefully not getting involved in the process of picking up the brains and consciously looking at the broader picture.
Well, I think it's just the practices means that we're just mitigating risk. I mean, what I think's funny, we talk about risk mitigation as an entrepreneur. I think I've told people that my journey's been about, I call myself as a optimistic risk mitigation scientist, as a form of entrepreneurship. My job is to actually just try and, have a crack, take a risk, but mitigate the risk as much as I possibly can, right? So the way that you mitigate a bad outcome for appointing or ending up with non-aligned owners on an ownership team is to actually be conscious about what you do. That's all it is, You can still make mistakes even with consciousness, but if you don't put in the new practices and you do it unconsciously, your probability of mitigating that risk is you're not mitigating the risk. You're probably going to walk right into a firestorm.
And to try and help create that consciousness, there's a big need to build an environment where trust and psychological safety is high.
Absolutely. So there's two fundamental concepts in ADAPT that our method helps and supports, and ultimately, hopefully, it gets implemented. And that is role clarity. So you get clear about these roles, and then maximizing trust, because without trust, you can't hand over the roles, and you can't. And then each team that is in your system needs to, for it to be effective, it must have high trust and psychological safety. So yes, they're the two big things that we're bringing.
Big pillars.
The big pillars.
Okay, all right. So I want to go to vision now. And I've heard you say this many times. You've got to form the team to do the work of the team. Form the team to do the work of the team. And when I say team in this context, I mean the owner-director team. And you've also said that one of the accountabilities of the owner-director team is to form the internal vision of the business. So I want to explore with you, firstly, what is an internal vision, and then why is it so important?
Yeah, so let's begin by saying why there's an internal vision and an external vision. Most people listening to this podcast would understand an external vision. An external vision is something that the customer can see, the employees, all the stakeholders can see, and it generally talks to the domain space in which they operate, right? So that's the external vision. The internal vision is something that may only ever be seen by the owners. It might be with other stakeholders, but fundamentally it's for the owners. And what it does is it's a detailed document that will give you the fundamental guidance for all the capital decisions and every subsequent decision in the business. So let me give you an example at Adapt by Design. Adapt by Design it has a very, very, very long. It needs a very long life and a very long runway to achieve its vision. I think it's going to take another 10 to 15 years. It just is what it is, and so consequently, the sort of capital. So let's just talk about our vision for a moment. Ultimately, we want to help SME owners build great businesses and resilient businesses. That's our purpose, but our higher vision about that is we want to have the back of those SME owners, and we want to build a resilient SME economy, because we think by doing that there'll be all sorts of benefits to the countries in which we operate, because we can potentially raise the water level of trust. Now, I know there's a lot to unpack in all of that, but anyway, the point about that is you don't deliver that in 1 year or 2 years or 5 years, and you don't talk about, I'm going to give you 20x return on da 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 da. So it's a vision that is actually motivated by a lot of things that are beyond money. So yes, we want this to be financially successful, because we want everybody in the system to have their day in the sun. That is a given. But we also know that this is the biggest patient capital type of business you could have, because what we want to do is see the vision come to fruition. Now, if we made a decision to take exit capital, so somebody says, I want to see this business, you exit in 5 years, 10 years, whatever, that would be immoral on our part, because we don't want exit capital. We want to exist, not exit. So thank you, Doug Bester. Anyway, so that's the key here. So how you make decisions about capital decisions, whether debt or equity, or how you design your ownership model, all these different things are going to be informed by your internal vision. And so there's a bit of a buzz going around in the public capitalism world. And as everybody knows, I believe that SME capitalism, public listed capitalism, well, not everybody knows, but I'm telling you now, that for my opinion, that there is a differential. And in the public listed world at the moment, they're talking a lot about ESG, so environmental and social governance. If you actually think about an internal vision document, it is actually it's environmental, social governance plus, because it includes, and very much includes, what do you want for your customer. So it's an integrated document of all of the stakeholders of your business and what you want for them. So what's cool about that is that you can have a stakeholder awareness, and you can design your business in service of integrating across your stakeholders and not bias one stakeholder over another. So it's quite a different mindset to shareholder value. And one final part to that, which I'll pause in a moment, but just on the on owner alignment, this is the way that we can get, if you've got 3 owners, you can get their internal vision designed or defined for each one of them, and then you can build an integrated internal vision, which then becomes the primary document for the governance of the business.
So I want to get specific now. How do you extract an internal vision? What is your process that you might take an ownership team through so that the output is an internal vision?
Yeah. Well, so I did a lot of research on the Spanish Inquisition, and they had this thing called a rack, and you just put each owner on the rack. That is my attempt at a bit of humour here, but it's very, very difficult. And for some people, it's extraordinarily easy, and for other people, it's very difficult to write it. And I understand this, because I've been in I don't think I really wrote my best internal vision. I didn't do my best internal vision work until I was 61. So it's only taken me 37 years. So I think it's a difficult thing to get to that point where you go, that's what it is. So this is the exercise I set. I help people understand who are the major stakeholder groups of their business, right? And there's the employees, the leaders, the owners of tomorrow, the customers, the suppliers, the partners, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they've got themselves and their family, And so what we do is say, sit in the future at some stage and write a letter in the past tense about what happened for each one of those stakeholder groups. So if they, and I've been pleasantly surprised by the richness of the internal visions that have come out from people that you would not expect them to write something so rich. And I think that the fact that it is a little bit of creative writing,
Define rich.
rich,
Sorry, Doctor.
I don't know, from the heart.
Okay. Yep.
From the heart. You know, an authentic dissertation on what they want for themselves and their family and their employees and their customers, because you know that integrating from, you know, if you think about, this is another thing why I've got so much empathy for SME owners, because you know they've got their family and they've got their kids and they want to be at the school play and they want to get to the footy and they want to be the footy coach, right? But at the same time, they've got this thing over here where they've got all these stakeholders in this business that they've built, and they've got this incredible feeling of responsibility to all of those stakeholders, and they've got to integrate across this. They've got to try and work out, well, how do I navigate a good life, you know, and of course, let's not lose sight of the fact that, you know, they've got to make financial security. So if the business is hurting and their financial security is being harmed and they're working hard and they're not seeing their family, that's a pretty horrible state of affairs, because they can't walk away. They're not employees. They can't just resign. They've got all these. I worked out that at one stage, you know, I said, with families and kids of family, and then customers, and then, you know, I started to realise, you know, you end up building a network over an acquirer. I think it was 10,000 people hanging off your tree, you know. And I think, you know, so that's, so that, to wrap all that up, I think that people, once they understand why it's important to get this out, they can then start to see, I can now find the intersection of my aspirations for life and my business. Now, there's nothing more powerful than that, because that is the cornerstone of all strategy in an SME.
I can actually attest to this personally. I had Gabe not force me. Well, kicking and screaming.
He used the rack as well.
So not on a corporate level or an SMA level or within a business, but just doing your own personal internal vision. It's absolutely terrifying, because what it forces you to do is to actually assess your priorities, because you can't be everywhere at all times. So I think when I did mine, it was the realization that there's a lot of clarity around this really quickly, because the process of putting it down into words is clarifying, but it also holds you accountable. So just that process took weeks. Real, like, you know,
Soul searching.
Yeah. It was an emotional, physical, mental, spiritual, like, effort. Unlike most things I've done, because it's yours, right? So imagine in an SME environment where that business is your baby, and like you said, you put your money where your mouth is, really, and you've got people around you that you also need to come through for. I can't actually imagine. I can't imagine that. Like that's if you do it properly, and the result being such a rich, I guess, tapestry of outcomes. Yeah, like, I've got mad respect for that, having just been through it myself internally.
And you said that the output of your own personal vision gives you something that holds you accountable. You also feel like it gives you something to aim at, something that helps you steer your ship.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, definitely. I think it becomes your compass.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because when back in the early iterations of ADAPT, I used to call it the guiding philosophy.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that's, I think, quite a good name, really. I mean,
yeah, it makes sense.
internal vision is a bit ugly when I think about it. So maybe
Might be a new
maybe okay,
iteration
we
to
just
the-
changed it. Yeah,
Guiding
no.
philosophy.
It's been a tremendous discovery for me doing this work to realize this one question that nobody asks. Nobody goes and asks this question for people, especially busy business owners. And the question is, what do you want? The amount of times I've sat with a founder and asked that question, and then they gave me an answer, and then asked the question again, and give me another more detailed answer, and then ask the question again. And we realize they've never gifted themselves the time to go, hold on a minute, I've got 30, 20, 10 more years left that I want to work. What do I want on the other side of that? And that's been a real key to unlock people to go on this journey to craft their internal vision. And you know, the second part of my question originally was, why is it so important? But I feel like we've covered that really quite well in that it gives you a real sense of your aspiration as the owner of the business, what you want on the other side of doing all of this, and that it absolutely and fundamentally forms a cornerstone for the strategy of the business. Because if the owner of the business wants one thing and the strategy of the business delivers on another thing, something will break. And we've seen that happen many times over. So I want to bring it back now. So the topic today was vision and capital. We talked about the accountabilities of the owner-directed team and how such a core accountability is to spend the time to figure out what is your internal vision so that it can guide the business. How does the vision affect capital decision making practically? You touched on it earlier, but I thought it'd be worth just digging in a little bit deeper. And I know you're never short of a war story, but I was wondering whether you might have one at the ready that can demonstrate this point.
Yeah, well, I think the way to look at this is that, first of all, got to define capital. So there's two ways of getting money into your business. There's debt funding, and then there's using the equity of the business. I think that the challenge here is, if you are not truly conscious about thinking, if you haven't done the internal vision work on the succession of ownership and who's going to own the business, is it that you're going to unconsciously get some capital in the business, and then when you get that capital in the business, you're giving away the decision rights on the internal vision to that percentage? And you didn't recognize it, but now your integrated vision is changing enormously because you gave away decision rights, and now you found out that the other owner is actually now trying to undermine your aspirations. So, I know of many situations where owners, and I won't get too specific because this is really intimate data, but I've got one in mind, where the owner gave easy entry for employees to the ownership of the business, and then couldn't work out why those people didn't behave like entrepreneurs. So consequently, he gave them a valuation that was lower and said, here you are, but had never really looked at what he wanted to do for the business. And then he found out that these people didn't act like entrepreneurs, now had capital in the business, and he became incredibly frustrated because they were slowing down decision making because they didn't understand the entrepreneurship, and so he became stuck, and the business became stuck because of that unconscious decision. So he needed, but as soon as we did the internal vision work, he goes, "Oh, why did I do that?"
I can think of 5 or 6 examples that would match that very closely. And one conversation that I've had that I thought was really interesting when we try to explore this very question mark on the behavior, why aren't they behaving like entrepreneurs? We came to the conclusion it's because they've never taken the risk to be able to have the decision rights, and therefore the pressure to make meaningful decisions in service of those decision rights that could adversely affect you because you carry the risk is not there, and therefore the decision making is more flippant.
That's right, and I think this is where people often say to me, "Oh, I want to build an employee ownership system." I said, "Well," and then I asked a question. I said, "Do you want an employee-owned system or a leader-owned system? Which one is it? Or do you want the leaders to have an entrepreneurial mindset so that they actually take risk? They go to the bank, they borrow the money, they buy in? Or are you going to somehow have a valuation that is calculated so it's purely so that they can enter at a low cost, and then you're going to use the profits of the business to pay it? So effectively, you gave away those shares so that they can get the upside, but they never understand the downside. So we've got a term called a capital call owner. And a capital call owner, in Adapt by Design, both Gabe and I are capital call owners. So what that means is if the business needs capital and we make a decision, okay, you need $100,000, well, we, in the proportions of our ownership of the company, go and get that capital. And that's the other side of ownership. That is the capital supply side, not the dividend return side. And I feel that even so, here's what to round all of this out is that what doing the internal vision process does is it raises the awareness of how much education needs to take place for people to understand what ownership is before they can make any decisions about how to design one. So there's a lot of learning required because you're intersecting, your business sits in a regulatory environment. So, you know, in the corporate, if it's a proprietary limited entity in Australia, it's the Corporations Act. So you've got this highly complex thing where you've got to sort of unify aspirations with regulatory systems. It's honestly, I've been down more cul-de-sacs than you know what to do with. So it's a very, very sophisticated area, and I think this is an area where, unfortunately, sometimes the regulatory professionals have not done the education work very well, and they don't start. I mean, Adapt by Design was found by an entrepreneur in service of entrepreneurs, and I don't think that the regulatory professionals have seemed to have really explored this whole concept of an internal vision. And that's why I think it's a bit of an invention or a bit of a discovery, because it's coming from the mindset of an SME owner, not from a regulatory professional. With all due respect to the regulatory professionals, I'm saying they're vital in all of this, and the advisors sit on owner-director teams, and they're vital, right? But it's just, if you don't do this internal vision work and how do you come up and do the design work to give a specification to the lawyers and accountants to deliver what you want, not somehow designed by, the constraints of regulation.
And you touched on the education point. I'll throw one last little war story out there, and then we'll aim at wrapping this up. And I'll keep the details limited to protect the identity of the customer. But there was a story shared with me recently where a owner-director team with some relatively new or young owner-directors on the team had never really had the education or the experience, and then that business went through a situation where there was a real crunch point, and if that journey went one way, everybody's livelihoods potentially could be on the line, and they didn't fully appreciate the complexity of being a director of a company when those things start to happen. They've never had the opportunity to go through the education to understand what does it mean to be a legal director of a company, or what does it mean to be the owner, who's the capital call owner, who has to leverage everything that they own to try and ensure that the business stays viable. And that was really interesting for me to hear their experience on the other side. It's like they've been through 3 MBAs in the course of a week in that learning. So that was really fascinating. So I think we did a really good job of exploring the concept of vision and capital, how they are connected, and how the stewardship of those is essentially what entrepreneurs do, and why we see a lot of that behavior and a lot of that work in the SME landscape. MD, I'm pretty close to this work, so I was wondering maybe if you wanted to draw a bit of a conclusion as a bit more of a third party on what you took out of what Bill shared with us today.
Yeah, I think what stands out to me is that as Bill exits the business as a day-to-day owner/leader.
Not as an owner.
Sorry, my apologies. As you exit the business, there's a whole heap of wisdom here that for any other business other than Adapt, and I'll let you share in a second as to how you're going to tackle it, that wisdom walks out the door. I think off air we were talking about how there's a real juxtaposition between East and West and how we value older individuals finishing up their careers and they're just essentially pushed out the door. Maybe as a wrap-up point, before we ask about what's next for you, you take us through your philosophy on becoming an elder.
Yeah, so sometimes I done all sorts of different reading and, from Zen Buddhism to you name it. I mean, I find I'm really fascinated by how different cultures have managed to, over long periods of time, build customs that make a lot of sense. That in the Western world, I think we're struggling to integrate into our lives. And the big one for me is how you integrate young energy, contemporary thinking with grey hair and wisdom. And wisdom, not in an arrogant form, wisdom being, that you have had the experiences. In my case, I've had 37 years of entrepreneurial experience that I want to be a resource for other people. I think what we've done, though, in the West, we tend to think that either the leadership tenure goes to the young and the old leave, or the old get stuck and don't make way for the young. I think if we can work out ways to integrate across that boundary so that we can integrate young leaders with the wisdom, but the people that hold the wisdom are not the top of a power hierarchy or anything, they're off to the side, and they're there as counseleries and mentors to the up-and-coming leaders, then we sort of square that circle, I think. We get a good outcome for everybody. So my new role as elder of Adapt by Design, I intend to do this for the life of the business or before the fire. I'm being cremated. So I'm keen to offer this to all in the business, not just leaders, anyone in the business, that that I can be there as a resource. And but the other part to this is that I'm going to be the cultural mentor for the organisation and technical leaders of the business, and that just means that there's somebody outside that has no other accountability that can be truly in service of that person without having an agenda at all. In actual fact, here are the rules. Anybody that comes to see me, I have no accountabilities other than to help them. Any accountability or any task that needs to be done, it's taken away by them, and they can never say Bill said.
And they buy the coffee.
And they buy the coffee.
or the
So
beer. All the beers.
Yeah, that's right, all the beers. And that's eldership. It can't be, it's got to be 100% in service of the individual. It can't be any form of, while I do my eldership role, I will decommission any form of ownership or directorship while I do my eldership role, because if it can't be coercive in any way, shape, or form, right? So there you go. That's it.
So other than becoming an elder for the business, what's next?
Well, for me, a part of being in Adapt by Design and helping the SME owners and now building a community, I have a responsibility to all of those stakeholders to not, be controversial. Don't say the wrong thing. It's not fair to my friends and colleagues in my, the Adapt ecosystem to do that. But for what I want to do going forward, I think I will have to break a few eggs now and again, and that means that I want to be a bit of an SME advocate. I want to have the back of people that choose to found SMEs. Now, to do that, that might mean I have to say some controversial things at times, and I want the freedom to do that. I can do that as Bill Withers. I don't think I can do that with the same level fairly as leader of Adapt by Design. So that's what I want to do. So SME advocacy means two areas, right? There's legislation and education. I genuinely don't think we've built the SME leadership. Adapt by Design has built a system for in situ leadership education. That's what our offering ultimately does. But I think there's so much more that can be done in SME education. And for all those legislators and educators that TAFEs, I think there is all sorts of different things we could be doing here, because what we haven't done is differentiate the corporation from the SME from the not-for-profit. They're three different types of entities that have entirely different architectures, and I want to double down on SME. The final thing is capital. I genuinely believe that, I have a vision that one day I can go into my super fund and I can find an asset class which is patient capital in the SME world, and I can actually pick companies in my community that are the SMEs that I want to back with my capital, and to get a long-term return that requires no exit of the business and I have no controlling vote. I just give that capital and I get a dividend right. And I'm backing them in because I'm investing in their vision. I don't want to steal their vision. So that's the vision I have for SME capital. And I feel that Australia's got all the conditions. We're a very fortunate country. And this is the country that should be leading the way in building an SME economy as a parallel to the corporation. And that's my vision.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I've always thought, and I know you agree with me, Gabe, that this is probably the only country in the world where in a single generation you can go from being absolutely dirt poor to really anything you want to be. It's very rare. I've travelled a fair bit, and I very rarely see it anywhere else. Gabe, what's next for Adapt by Design?
Whoa, man, where do I start? I think next year is going to be a big year for us. So for the last 18 months, Bill and I have had the opportunity to execute on his leadership succession. And this week it's happened. we've been able to release him from all technician and leadership accountabilities in the business, which is fantastic because that enables him to achieve the what's next for Bill.
And can I just add there, Gabe, that for those of you that are in the ADAPT community, we sat and decommissioned me off the teams on the platform. This is just a plug for Embed Adapt. But so, you know, we are data driven to the end.
Absolutely. I did that work yesterday. And so we've just executed on Bill's leadership succession, and we're now able to activate his succession into eldership. And we talk about this concept of eldership to an SME. We are now going to practice it and see how it works and see how we do that well. And hopefully we can teach our learnings to other founders who might want to take a similar path. So that's really exciting. Bill and I are going to engage very regularly as an owner-director team on our work as the owner-director team, but also on his work as an elder into our system. Internally for ADAPT next year, our coaching offering has had a really strong year in 2022. We've significantly grown our customer base, and we've been able to redesign our offering to start to make it available, roll it out to our existing customers and make it available to future customers at a more accessible point. And that's crucial if you service the SME market. We've also been working really hard on building our self-led product to be able to give a good level of foundational leadership and guidance to building resiliency to micro SMEs at a unit cost that totally makes sense to them. So we're going to lean into those two value streams in the new year and continue to build them out. We're also going to, I'll do a bit of work alongside Bill in pursuing this vision to try and solve the problem of patient capital for SMEs. So we've got a lot of work and thinking to do there. So that will happen next year. And then hopefully around February, we can maybe give a few other WA businesses a run for their money in the Telstra Awards. That will be brilliant.
That's fantastic, gents. Look, personally from me, I've had the absolute pleasure, to be honest, to see you both operate together under one roof, and it is just it's very rare to see two people, let alone an organisation of people who genuinely like each other and who vibe off each other in an environment where they are just purely themselves and everyone's really accepting of that. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to spend a bit of time at ADAPT to see how you guys operate, and look, again, it's an absolute pleasure. So thank you. Bill, good luck.
Thank you.
Enjoy the next chapter. And Gabe, it's going to be super exciting to see what's next.
Thank you, and thanks for hosting us and making
pleasure.
episode 1 possible. And I look forward to, hopefully finishing the series this year.
100%. Thanks, gents.
Thanks.
Thank you.